Hello and welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Recently, in my Warhammer Quest restoration series, I looked at repairing map tiles and even making your own. Now, I really like those map tiles, but I know that many people like to craft their own 3D versions, which admittedly looks absolutely boss. But this got me thinking about other ways to create Warhammer Quest dungeons, and in particular, using the Dungeons and Lasers sets from Archon Studio. I have talked about these sets many times on the channel. I think they are amazing and I have stacks of them. And the good news is they are an exact match in size for Warhammer Quest. With enough Dungeons and Laser sets, you can create all of these small rooms and corridors you need. There are a few issues though. Making the quest rooms and the long staircase require a bit more effort, introducing additional elements and perhaps even scratch building something. Furthermore, the Dungeons and Lasers doors aren't double width, which means you either have to treat them as being double width or find an alternative. Interestingly, the Warhammer Quest doorways do look very good with Dungeons and Lasers terrain, and they even sit on the lipped edge of the tiles rather neatly. However, they don't fit if you are using the walls. Nevertheless, I think the Dungeons and Lasers terrain could be a good starting point for making a custom tile set for the game. Or of course, other dungeon crawlers that work on the same scale. The various themes available, caves, temples, mines, sewers and more, mean you can really open up the world and create unique environments that are in keeping with your campaign narrative. You can even create these cities and towns your heroes venture into. That being the case, I thought I would take this opportunity to drop a supercut of the various painting guides I have previously made for these terrain kits. Hopefully these will not only be useful for anyone with Dungeons and Lasers terrain to paint, but also for anyone who is making their own tiles and would like some ideas for quick paint schemes. Thanks for watching. We're going to paint up the Abomination Vaults set, which was made in conjunction with Paizo for use with the Abomination Vaults adventure path. And in the Abomination Vaults box you get 6 frames of terrain like this. They are all exactly the same. That's really good because it means you can paint this up in a production line method. And I'm going to start by spraying all of the frames with Chaos Black. I find that with terrain like this it's much easier to undercoat it on the frame, then cut it out of the frame, and then just use a little black out of the pot on anywhere where there was a connecting point that you had to cut. It's going to save a lot of headaches when it comes to spraying both sides of the terrain. By keeping it on the frame, it just speeds up the whole process. And if you really want to, you can paint the whole thing on the frame and just cut it off at the end and do any touch-ups right at the very end. But I have removed everything from the frames, and you can see there are marks wherever I have had to cut frame away. So we are going to use our black, and I'm just going to very quickly go around the edge of every single piece, covering up those marks. And of course, if you missed any areas when you were spraying the miniatures, this is your opportunity to fill in those areas now. Next, it's time to get out the trusty Mechanicus Standard Grey. And this is quite a nice grey. It's kind of a little bit of a blue hint to it, but if you want to go for something much bluer, you can do maybe a wolf grey or something to really go for a more ethereal blue look for the stones. But I've gone for Mechanicus Standard Grey, and what I'm doing here is an overbrush or a wet brush. It's like a dry brush, but you leave a lot more paint on the brush. You very quickly move the brush over the surface of the miniature. It's going to pick out all of the raised details, all of the flat surfaces. Really the only things that the brush is not going to touch are those deep recesses, and that's fine, that's what we're looking for here. We want all of those recesses to show up. And then when it's completely dry, I'm just going to switch to Ulthuan Grey, and I'm going to do a very, very heavy dry brush. So this is a dry brush, not an overbrush. And we're going to pick out all of the highest areas on all of the stonework. On the floor pieces, I'm going to use large circular motions, and I'm really going to put a lot of paint on here. Really to try and bring out every single detail. And on the walls, it's a matter of picking out all those edges, all of those raised stone areas, all of those little tentacle details. And at that point, you already have something that's starting to look decent. But there are a few little metal details on some of the elements, like this tile here has a grate in it. So we're going to pick out those details with lead belcher. I've thinned the lead belcher a little bit so it goes on nice and smoothly. It's always a good idea to thin your paints a little bit. You can apply 2 coats if you need to. But we're going to mark in all of those metal details, And then I'm going to get my Nuln Oil and I'm going to put a wash of Nuln Oil over all of those metal areas, and that's just going to dingy it up a little bit. The other thing you can do with Nuln Oil at this point if you want to, is you can paint any stones that are set back from the most raised areas, and you can line in around all of the tentacle details. This isn't a necessary step, but what it can do is it can make the details pop even more, and it can also blend where you have been doing the dry brushing. Dry brushing can look a little bit dusty sometimes. By using the washes, you can help to make it look a little bit smoother. If we look at these two wall sections here, the top wall section has not had any Nuln Oil applied. The bottom wall has had Nuln Oil applied. It has gone onto all of the stones that are set back, and it has gone all around those tentacle details and in the eye detail at the top. It's up to you if you want to take that extra step. Next, I'm switching to matte white. There are some little candles here on the back of this long wall section. We're just going to mark those in with the matte white. Obviously being careful not to go over any of the grey we have already painted. And if you really want to, you can leave this out. It's not absolutely necessary to paint these candles. I don't think many people would really even notice they were there. But we're also going to use matte white on the torches. You get two little torches on each frame, which hang on little holes set into some of the walls. And I'm going to do my little simple recipe for a burning torch on these, which starts with a coat of matte white. Next, I'm switching to Holy White, which is a speed paint from the new Army Painter speed paint range, and I'm just going to apply a very small amount of this over the candles. It just adds a little bit of shading and detail. We're moving on to the doors now, and I'm starting with Balthazar Gold, and I'm doing again an overbrush, so not quite a dry brush, a little bit more paint on the brush than that. So I'm going over all of the details of the hinges, the keyhole, and the metal surround. And then I'm switching to Mournfang Brown. I'm going to thin this down, and I'm going to apply this to the wooden area, so all of the recessed areas of the door, leaving all of that metallic area showing. I've thinned this down quite a lot so I have a nice amount of control over it, and I'm only going to apply a single coat because of the way I'm going to be painting the rest of the door. If you want to apply 2 coats you can do, but I found that 1 was good enough. The aim is just to be neat and not to get it over the metal. Then of course it's time for Agrak's Earthshade. I can't do a painting guide without Agrak's Earthshade, and this is going to go all over the wooden area. Again, don't apply it to the tentacles, don't apply it to the metal trim or the keyhole. Just apply a good amount over the wooden area, making sure that you do get it pulled all around all of the metal detailing so you get some nice definition. Then I'm switching to Liberator Gold, and I'm going to do a dry brush over the metal areas, just on the very raised details. This is just to give it that nice spot highlight, a little bit of a bright contrast over the Balthazar Gold, which is a much more muted gold colour. And if you get a little bit on the wood, it doesn't really matter, because afterwards I am going to go back to my Mournfang Brown. I'm thinning it down again, and I'm going to apply 1 more coat of Mournfang Brown, making sure that I keep those darker shades in the recesses. I'm also using the Mournfang Brown for the wooden parts of the torches, and then once that wood is dry, we can make it look like the torches are burning. We're going to start with Flashgitz Yellow, and I'm doing something which isn't quite a dry brush, because what I'm doing is I've got an old brush here, and I'm stabbing the paint over the white. I want a lot of the white to show through, and I don't want any solid areas of yellow. I want it to be stippled on all over the white. Then I'm switching to Evil Sunz Scarlet, and I'm doing the same sort of thing again here. It's sort of half dry brush, half stabbing, because I don't want any solid blocks of colour for the red anywhere. I want a lot of that white and a lot of that yellow to carry on showing through. The fun thing with fire is when you're painting it, you paint in reverse. You start with your lightest colours and you work up to your darkest colours. And that is why our last colour going on is Abaddon Black, which is just a very, very light dry brush, just on the very ends. And that is done. That is a finished thing. We can now assemble the whole thing, and this is what we have. It is by no means up to the standard of the paintwork that you see on the box art for this product, but when you've got this all put together, I think it looks decent. And what we have here is the entire contents of 1 of the 6 sprues. These pillars just move out, they're not attached in any way, and there are also little piles of rubble. Those aren't attached, you can just move those aside. And then this is our final painted product. You can see the torches are hanging in the walls, those just push into little holes. We have our door. And one of the fun things about this terrain is the doors are functioning, they do open. But you can see the walls are painted on both sides. There are the little candles. And for the amount of effort put into painting it, I think that doesn't look half bad. The great thing being as well, because you have 6 sprues in the box and they are all exactly the same, and that means it's going to be really quick. By the time you've finished painting your Mechanicus standard grey on the last element, you can go back to the first element and do your Ulthuan grey. By the time you've got through that, you can start doing the doors, and you can just keep going through it and you will get the whole set painted in just a few hours, really. Today, we're going to take a look at painting the Dwarven mine set, and if you look at the front cover of the box, you can see there is a beautiful professionally painted set right there, and I want to try and emulate the look of that set, but in a much quicker way. I think it's quite important to be able to get terrain painted up and on the table as quickly as possible, so you can focus more on playing your games and having your adventures. But anyway, each of these boxes comes with 6 identical sets of terrain. You get walls, doors and floors, and then you get some other accessories like lamps. And to get started, I have sprayed all of the frames with Chaos Black, and I've kept all the components attached to the frames at this stage. I find this is much easier than cutting out all the terrain and then spraying it afterwards. But once the Chaos Black is dry, it's a case of cutting all of the components out, but you will have little marks where the frames were attached, and you will need to go back with some black and just paint over those marks. But once you've done that and everything is dry, you can actually start painting. And to begin with, I'm using Steel Legion Drab, and what I'm doing is an overbrush. It's a bit like a dry brush, but you have a lot more paint on your brush, but you're still whipping it across the surface of the miniature, so you're hitting all of the raised details, but you are leaving the Chaos Black in all of the recesses. This is a really quick and effective way to get colour all over the miniature without losing detail. Next, I'm switching to Agrax Earthshade, and I'm going to apply this to all of the wooden areas, and that's going to enrich the brown of the wood, and it's also going to bring out all of the lovely wood texture. So we want a good coat of Agrax over all of that wood to make sure all of those details really pop. I'm not going to put the Agrax over the metal end caps. There are 2 caps at each end of the walls, and I'm also not putting it over all of the stonework. However, I am going to apply Agrax into the recesses between the stones. That's just going to make all of the stones pop just a little bit more. And you don't have to be too fussy about this, just get the shade on quickly. Next, I'm switching to Xandri Dust, and this time we are going to do a dry brush. So I've got a really big brush, I'm putting some paint on that brush, I'm wiping almost all of the paint back off, and then I'm doing a heavy dry brush over everything. And I should point out that what I'm doing on the walls, I'm also going to be doing on the floors as well. So the floors have already had Steel Legion Drab applied, and then I'm going to dry brush them with the Xandri Dust as well. And when I'm doing the floors, it's big swirling motions. I want big circular motions, and it's really going to pick out all of the stonework. And there's a really nice effect of standing water on these floor tiles as well, and it will pick out all of those little ripples around the stones. You can see as the brushwork is going on, those details are just getting more and more evident. Next up, I'm switching to Screaming Skull, and what I'm doing now is a targeted dry brush just over the stonework, because the wooden areas are done, but we want the stonework to be a different colour, we want it to be a much lighter colour. So I've got the smallest dry brush I own, and I am just dry brushing just the stonework, trying not to hit the wood areas. If you hit the wood in a few areas, it's not the end of the world, because that's just going to come across as variations in the colour of the wood, but as much as possible you want to try and focus this just on the stones, and you want to keep going, keep applying it until those stones are really, really bold. All of the nice texture on those stones has really come out. And again, we're going to do the same thing on the floor, but with a bigger dry brush, because we don't need to worry about hitting any wooden elements on these floor tiles. So again, big swirling motions, making sure we hit the edges of all of those stones and all of those little stones that are in the standing water. And once we're done with that, most of our dry brushing is over for this stuff. So next I'm switching to a Chthonian camo shade, and what I'm doing here is I'm applying it to that standing water. I want the standing water to be a dank green colour. I want it to look like it has been stood in a cave for a long time. It's got some algae in there, it's got some slime in there. It's generally just unpleasant surface water. And a very thin coat of a Chthonian camo shade will do that quite nicely. And of course, because it is translucent, you are still seeing some of that pattern and shading from the dry brushing underneath. So all of the ripples are still evident. There are still variations in the colour. And I think this is just a really nice quick way of giving that sense that there is standing water there. I don't do it in this video, but you can actually go a bit further with this. You could put down some water effect over the water areas, or maybe use a gloss varnish to make it look shiny. But like I say, I didn't do that. I didn't think it was necessary to take that extra step. I'm just trying to get this stuff done quickly. And of course, if you don't want to go with green, if you want to do a different colour, you can do that as well. Whatever you think would look good in your dank mine. And in fact, you don't need to put any colour down there at all. You could just leave it. Next up is lead belcher, and we're going to thin that lead belcher down and we're going to apply it to those metal caps that I mentioned earlier. There are 2 caps at the ends of each of the wall sections, and I'm just going to apply it over there. There are rivets in the caps, and I'm being careful not to paint the lead belcher into the recesses around those caps because I'm not doing any more dry brushing or washes on these metal areas. I want them to be quite bright, but I obviously don't want to lose that detail. So just being careful that when we paint those circles, we don't paint into the recesses. And we also need to put some lead belcher on the lanterns that are attached to the support beams. You get 1 support beam on each of the 6 frames, and they have been painted up exactly the same way as everything else so far, and now we're painting the lantern with the lead belcher. While that is drying, we're going to paint the torches. The wooden parts of the torches again have been painted the same way as all of the other wood that you've seen in this video, but now we've got some matte white and we're just applying this to the part of the torch that would be lit. We just want to make sure we have completely covered our Chaos Black primer. And we're also going to stipple that onto the lantern that is hanging on the support beam, and at the moment that is going to look ghastly, but hopefully by the end of this, it won't. Next is Flashgit's yellow, and I'm stippling this on the white area of the torch. I want a lot of the white to show through, but I want to make sure there's some yellow all over the top of that. And again, doing the same thing on the lantern. Then I'm switching to Evil Sun Scarlet, doing the same thing again, but it's a much lighter stippling this time. If you watched my video on painting the Abomination vaults, I did exactly the same process for the torches in that set as well. And of course, we mustn't forget to also put some red on this lantern. Finally, for the torches we're using some Abaddon Black, just a very light dry brush just on the top, just to give that sense of the carbon burning off from the fire. I'm now going back to my lead belcher, I'm thinning it down and I'm reapplying it to the lantern, and I'm going to paint over the top and the bottom of the lantern, and I'm going to paint on the front edges of the grid work that's on the lantern. So the painting that I've done for the actual light will still be on the sides of the metal areas, but it won't be on the front facing areas of the metal, if that makes sense. And I wasn't quite happy with how that was looking, so I've now got some red tone from Army Painter here. I'm just applying a small amount of that, just to try and tie those colours together a little bit more. And after I'd done that, I still wasn't happy, so I got some Cassandora Yellow, which is a really nice bright shade, and I've just applied some of that in there as well. And it's starting to get a warm glow, which is what I'm after, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm happy enough. The last thing to deal with are the doors, so we're going to use Mournfang Brown, and again we're doing an overbrush, so as before we have more paint on our brush than if we were doing a dry brush, but not so much that we're going to obscure the detail in the door. And when that's dry, we're going to do an overbrush with Xandru Dust on the little slat in the door. It's not really necessary, it could all be the same wood colour if you want, but on the actual cover art they have a different wood tone there, so I did the same thing. And then it's back to lead belcher to paint the hinges and also the door handles. And again, the aim here when applying the lead belcher is not to obscure any of the recessed details, because I'm not going to be putting any more washes on this metal. I want it to match up with the same colour hue as those end caps on the walls. And of course, I just need to be careful not to get it over the wood. The final thing we need to do is get some Agrax Earthshade, and the Agrax Earthshade is going to go all over the wood areas, and it will go around the metal areas. It will pull up against the edges of the metal areas and just make those metal areas pop just a little bit more. And of course, it will enrich the wooden colour of the door and will bring out all of that detail. And with that done, painting is finished. The next thing to do is to wait for it to dry completely, then give everything a coat of anti-shine. And then when that is dry, we can assemble it. And just as a reminder, here is the front cover of the Dwarven Mine set. This is the professionally finished job. This is what I was attempting to emulate in a quick and easy manner, and this is what I have ended up with. This is the contents of one of the 6 frames, so you will get 6 times this amount of content in the box. And I'm pretty happy with how that has turned out. The wooden beam that has the lantern attached to it, that is a separate element. That's not attached to anything, so you can just put those in if you want them, or just take them out. If you're playing a game, you can put them in to begin with, move them out of the way if they're just getting in the way of what you're trying to do. But then with that moved aside, you can see we have all of the walls attached, we have the door attached, and we have the 2 torches in the walls. I'm quite happy with how the standing water came out. The doors in these sets do open. You can see the door is hinged open there. My one minor complaint about these sets is all of the components fit together quite tightly. So once you have painted the doors, the hinges are very stiff, and over time the paint on the hinges is going to rub off if you keep opening and closing those doors. There's not really a lot that can be done about that. Regardless, I'm really happy with how the walls turned out. I really like the way that the stones stand out from the wood, and I think that is a decent standard for anybody's tabletop if they're just looking to get terrain on the table quickly. Today I'm going to be painting the City of Absalom Pathfinder terrain set from Archon Studio, and what I'm going to do in this video is find a quick and easy way to recreate as accurately as possible the look of the officially painted miniatures from the front of the City of Absalom box. The intention being to get good, clean, tabletop ready miniatures as quickly as possible so we can start building our dungeons and having fun with our friends. To get started, I have spray undercoated the terrain on the frame using Citadel Chaos Black. And once that undercoat is completely dry, we can use our faithful side cutters to start removing all of the components from the sprue. This is really easy to do, just working around the components, clipping away all of the connectors, trying to keep as flush to the miniature as possible. Once you have removed the components, you will have nubs that you will need to file down or remove with a mold line remover. That will leave little marks all around the miniature that you will then need to touch up with black paint. But before we get to that, I did just want to show you a little trick that somebody mentioned in the comments of a previous video I did on Archon Studio Terrain. These pieces go together using clips. And when you are painting the miniatures, you can actually use these clips to make it easier to hold the miniature while you are painting. You just pop one clip into place, they fit really securely, and then you can hold onto that like a little paint handle whilst you paint around it. You can do exactly the same thing with the walls, and then when you are leaving the wall to dry between coats of paint, it will just stand upright so it's not going to stick to your painting table or anything. It's just a handy little thing you can do to make painting a little bit easier. Anyway, like I said, we are just going to overpaint all those little connector points that we have filed down. I'm just going to use some Abaddon Black for this. It doesn't matter if it doesn't match up with the Chaos Black undercoat completely. With that done, we're going to start by painting the floor sections. We're going to use Mournfang Brown, and we are going to do a heavy overbrush. This is a bit like a dry brush, but you have more paint on the bristles of your brush. It's a good way to paint large areas quickly without obscuring all the detail. Then we're going to switch to Xandri Dust, and we are going to do a dry brush. So we're still using a big brush here. We're going to work in circular motions, and we're just going to pick out all of the raised details with this lighter brown colour. Next in the video, I will be switching to Athonian Camo Shade to paint in between the lines of the floorboards, because looking at the officially painted miniatures on the cover of the box, there is green in between the boards, but Athonian Camo Shade doesn't work very well, so I will be doing something a little bit different later in the video. I've just left it in here just to show you that it was something that I tried and it didn't really work. And then I'm going to use some Seraphim Sepia on the main parts of the floorboards. And I'm using Seraphim Sepia rather than something like Agrax Earthshade because I want to enrich the browns and I want to emphasize the detailing, but I don't want these floorboards to be really, really dark. The officially painted floorboards are quite bright and vibrant. Using Agrax would probably have made everything just a bit too dark for the look I'm going for. Then when that is dry, I'm switching to Army Painter Speed Paint Orc Skin, and I'm going to reapply this into the recesses around the floorboards to try and get that green mildewy look from the painted miniatures on the cover of the box, and this works much better. Army Painter Speed Paints are something that I have only recently added to my collection of paints, and I tend to use them for little details on things like this. Adding it between the floorboards actually worked quite well. When that's dry, I'm switching to Skeleton Bone and we are doing another dry brush. This is quite a heavy dry brush, again just to brighten up the floorboards, help to emphasize all those details, but also tone down that green as well. And then I'm going to do a final highlight of Screaming Skull right at the very end. Again, just another extra brighter coat. You don't need to do that if you feel you're already happy with the look of the floorboards at this stage. But with that dry brush, the floorboards are done and you can see there are still green in the recesses and the floorboards themselves are quite pale, which is exactly what I wanted. Next we are moving on to the walls. Of course we are starting from our Chaos Black undercoat, and the first paint we're going to apply is Avalon Sunset. We are going to be painting these areas of plaster on the walls, and Avalon Sunset is a good base coat to start from. I'm going to apply 2 thin coats, and I'm not too worried about getting it over the surrounding wood area. All of that will be neatened up later. Then I'm switching to Agrax Earthshade and I'm going to slosh this all over the Avalon Sunset. We are really just trying to dirty up the yellow at this stage, and at the moment this will look quite horrible. Don't worry about it, it will improve. Next we're using some Mournfang Brown. We're going to water it down about 50% so it's really nice and runny, and we are going to splodge patches of it all over our dirty Avalon Sunset plaster. This is a haphazard thing, there's no reason or rhyme to it. You can apply loads of brown or not very much. You can change the consistency of the brown, you can make the brown stronger and darker if you want to. Doesn't really matter, do whatever you feel like doing. And then we're switching to Skeleton Bone and we are going to start doing dry brushing over the plaster in circular motions, and you will need to do several coats of dry brush in this manner. I think I ended up doing 4 on these sections just to keep layering up that bright colour. And as you apply the layers you will see that the plaster starts to look much better. And then finally I'm going to use Ulthuan Grey for a dry brush highlight. If you want to, you can go one stage further and actually do a white dry brush as well, but I left it at the grey for a slightly off-white plaster finish. And that may seem like quite a lot of effort for the plaster, but when you look at it up close you will see all that mottling, you will see all those different colours and hues showing through your dry brush layers. Next we're switching to Mournfang Brown. I'm going to thin it down and I am going to paint over all of our wood surround. We just need to be careful here not to paint over any of the plaster areas that we have already painted. And you can apply 2 coats if you want to, I didn't bother. Next we're switching to Seraphim Sepia because we are basically painting these walls the same way we painted the floorboards. So I want to enrich the brown, but I don't want to darken it up too much. So Seraphim Sepia is the option I've gone for. Then we're using Skeleton Bone and we're going to do a dry brush of Skeleton Bone. We have skipped the Xandri dust on the walls just to get a slightly different colder wood colour on the walls. You probably won't be able to tell the difference just eyeballing it on the table, but it should give you just a slightly different hue. And you will notice I haven't painted the sculpted face on the section of the wall here. You can, if you want to, paint that in wood as well, but I'm going to do something different with that to make it look like the officially painted miniatures on the cover of the box. I'm now also going to do a Screaming Skull highlight. Again, this is just a dry brush over the sharp edges of the wall, anywhere where the light would naturally fall. Not being too fussy about it, but making sure we get all of those lovely details highlighted. Next we're going to do the sculpted face, and we are starting with Retributor Gold. We're going to thin this ever so slightly and we're going to paint this on all of the hair. Again, we just need to be careful not to get it over the plaster. On the cover of the box they have used blue and gold motifs for things like the doors and the sculpted faces, and it looks really good. So that's what we're recreating here. When the gold is dry, we're going to do a Seraphim Sepia wash, just to bring out the recessed shading. And then if you want to, after that, you can reapply Retributor Gold as a highlight. Next we're moving on to the face. I'm using Deep Blue from Army Painter. This is not a speed paint. It comes out of the bottle quite thin no matter how much I shake it, so I will be applying 2 thin coats, and I don't need to actually thin this paint down at all. But I'm going to carefully apply it all over the face. You can use a different blue if you prefer, if you have some Citadel blues you want to use. But after 2 coats of that, I'm using a blue tone, again from Army Painter. This is going to enrich the blue, it's going to enhance the colour, but it's also going to provide some recessed shading over the lips and the eyes. And then when that is completely dry, I'm going to switch to Macrack Blue, which is a slightly lighter blue than the deep blue, and we are going to do a highlight over the nose, across the eyebrows, over the cheeks, just to help bring out those details and make the whole face pop. And you can do a couple of highlights if you want, but I'm trying to do things really quickly here, so a single highlight is all I'm doing. That completes the face, but there's one last thing we need to deal with on these walls. There are some areas where the plaster is cracking away and you can see the blockwork underneath. You can deal with that exposed blockwork by painting it grey, applying a Nuln Oil wash and then doing a highlight, but I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use Gravelord Grey, one of the Army Painter speed paints. With this stuff you can just splodge it into the gaps, it will fill in the recesses, it does all of the hard work for you. You can of course if you want to go back and highlight the speed paints afterwards, but I am not going to bother. I'm just splodging it into the recesses where the plaster is cracked away and calling it done. Next up we have the doors. On the box art, some are red, some are blue. We're going to paint this one blue. It's going to be pretty easy. We're starting again from our Chaos Black base coat, and then we are going to use Mournfang Brown, and just like we did with the floors, we are going to do an overbrush. So we've got quite a lot of paint on the brush, and we're just whipping it over the details of the door. It's going to leave black in the recesses and apply brown over everything else. We're then switching to Agrax Earthshade, and we're going to do a healthy wash of Agrax over the whole thing. We don't need to worry at this moment about getting it over the hinges and things like that. Then we are switching to our Deep Blue, and we are going to do a heavy dry brush of Deep Blue over the whole thing. If you want to do red instead of blue, just pick a really dark red and do the same thing at this stage. And when that's dry, we're going to switch to Macrack Blue, and we're going to do another dry brush just to brighten up the whole thing. If you are using red, again just pick a brighter red than the one you used originally and do a second dry brush. Next we're switching to Retributor Armour, we're thinning it down slightly, and we're going to paint all of the hinges, we're going to paint the door knockers, the handles, all that sort of stuff, just being careful not to get it over the blue. You can, if you want to, do some highlighting and stuff on that gold. I'm not going to bother, I'm just going to leave it exactly as is, and we're going to move on to Lead Belcher because we are going to apply Lead Belcher to the kick plate at the bottom of the door. Again, I've thinned this down slightly so it goes on easily. Just going to apply 1 coat, 2 coats isn't really necessary. And then I'm going to use just a little bit of Nuln Oil just on that kick plate because it would be a little bit grubby. And with that done, our door is finished. Next we are moving on to the candlesticks and the lanterns. Again, starting from Chaos Black, and then we're going to use some matte white, and we're going to apply 2 thin coats of matte white over the candle and the candle flame. It doesn't matter if you get it over the holder at all, just make sure you get a good coating of the white over the candle itself. For the lantern, we're also going to be using matte white, but we're just going to splodge it into the central area of the lantern where the light would be. And again, it doesn't matter if you get it over the other bits of the lantern, we'll neaten that up in a little bit. Next we're using Flash Gitz Yellow, and we're just going to very lightly dry brush the tip of the candle flame, so most of the candle flame will still be white, but there will just be some yellow at the top part. On the lantern, we're just going to splodge some yellow on the central mass of the lantern, again where the glow would be coming from. Then we switch to Evil Sun Scarlet, and we just do a very light dry brush on the absolute tip of the candle flame. And when it's done, you should have something that looks like that, which is pretty good. For something of this scale, it looks like a candle flame. On the lantern, we're doing something similar, just a very light stippling of the Evil Suns, just to try and give a sense of heat and warmth and light. Next up, we are using the Holy White Speed Paint from Army Painter. We're just going to apply this to the candle. The Holy White is a really good way to quickly shade something that should be white. If you don't have the Holy White Speed Paint, you can just leave the candle white anyway. And then we're switching to Lead Belcher, and we are going to apply this to the candle holder, and of course we will also apply it to the surround of the lantern. We will then switch to Nuln Oil, one coat of Nuln Oil over all of the Lead Belcher we have painted on the lantern and the candle, and then that is done as well. There are a few other accessories in the set. They are very easy to paint. For the stack of books, the pillar and the barrel, I just used the same processes that I used on the flooring. For the luggage, I painted it Mournfang brown, and then I overpainted it with the Army Painter Speed Paint Blood Red, just to make it look like a dark leathery colour. For the scrolls, I also used Army Painter Speed Paint. I started from a white base coat. I used Pallid Bone for the scrolls, Blood Red for the bindings on the scrolls, and then Dark Wood for the base that the scrolls are sitting on. There is also a hanging sign in the set, which isn't in this image here, but I will show it to you in a minute. For that, I just used Retributor Gold, and then I used the Army Painter Speed Paint Magic Blue for the blue detailing. And this is the finished result. You get 6 identical frames in the City of Absalom set, and what you are seeing here is the complete contents of one of those 6 frames. And I think that looks pretty decent, considering it was all done with very simple methods and just a few different colours. On each of the 6 frames you get half of a pillar. You are supposed to clip them together to create 3 complete pillars, but if you want to, you can use just half of a pillar and push it back against the wall, as I have done here. If we take a closer look, you can see on the right hand side we have that gold hanging sign that I mentioned previously, and I think that looks quite bright and warm and welcoming. I'd quite like to go and visit the City of Absalom myself. The doors I mentioned in a previous video, I will repeat it here, are on hinges. They do actually open. When they're unpainted, they are a little bit loose in the hinges. Once they are painted, they are sometimes a little bit stiff, but if you're careful, you can pop them open for your adventurers to peek inside and see what's going on. And there we have it. That is my quick and easy way to paint the City of Absalom terrain set from Archon Studio, so that it looks a little bit like the officially painted miniatures on the cover of the City of Absalom box. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.